I'm Kathy McCrum, VP HR and Safety at SaskPower.
Kathy, what would you say are the main forces that are currently shaping Canada's power and electricity industry, and where is this sector headed? And I guess with that, how well prepared do you think we are for it?
I think there's several factors that are really shaping where the industry is going. If you look at the federal government regulation with respect to the target to be net zero by 2050, for some provinces and utilities, that's a much has to be much more aggressive move, but it's certainly shaping our strategies and what we need to do differently within our various organizations. And then I think I'd be amiss if I didn't mention the move away from fossil fuel and conventional coal. And again, that's impacting four of the provinces more specifically. But certainly is shaping where we're going. And I would say the federal government is providing funding today that is helping with some of this, different types of clean energy and low carbon projects. And some provinces are sort of being forced to move ahead even quicker than the federal government targets of 2050. I think, it's also important to not forget about what's happening in the US with the change in leadership there. And with Biden now coming in as the leader, he's set a new target for the US grid, very aggressive, 2035 to be clean. I think it's by 2035, which puts a lot of pressure and sends a message to vendors, the public, and I think will only expedite what we will do here in Canada. So, I think that's a big force that's shaping where we're going to go. Another thing, I think is important to mention is Indigenous economic reconciliation. So from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the calls to action, and also UNDRIP, having a significant impact. And as Indigenous peoples work to benefit from Canada's economy, it'll become increasingly more important for all of the organizations and utilities to really partner and find ways to involve and consult and bring the Indigenous people in. The partnerships will play a huge role in some of the projects, both on transmission and generation side, and I would say across Canada. So it also, I think, has really forced, even before now, but will continue into the future for us organizations to think differently about how we hire and how we train, because I think there is still some unconscious bias that exists in some of our practices and what we're doing, and then how we set people up for success, how we're training, upskilling, all those kinds of things. I think will become more and more important as we look ahead. And then, of course, electrification. Can't forget about that piece. So the electrification of transportation is impacting and shaping the future for sure. It's also going to have an impact on how we heat our buildings in the near future. It'll create load growth, I think, with some of these jurisdictions that maybe are flatter today. And as other industries move to electrifying their processes to reduce carbon footprint, the electric utilities will have to move in this direction to be net zero, I think, well before 2050. It's just forcing that timeline to be, even more aggressive, and we have to keep up.
Maybe you could speak to maybe two or three key technologies that you think are going to have the biggest influence on the energy sector in Canada, electricity in particular, and how it is going to impact, and you started touching upon it, the requirement for workers and skills, basically.
For us, really that grid modernization piece. So we're moving to modernize the grid. And so within that, there's 4 different projects, and maybe I'll just speak specifically to 2 of them. One would be our move to AMI, or smart meters, and just how that's changing customers and their ability to see what's happening with their own power usage. We've also had this in place actually for a couple of years, but where we've found that we were missing the mark is we didn't have we didn't have the appropriate resources in place to actually do something with the data. So that's what we're moving towards now. But it's going to require and is requiring some different skill sets within. So we're having a look at retraining, within the company, but also looking at bringing in new skill sets that are going to be able to really analyze and look at that data. The term that is being used, data scientists. It is really becoming a science. So I would say that is a big piece for us. And just amalgamating all of the technologies and having a centralized operations center that is really keeping an eye on all of it and what are we doing with it, and making sure that we can actually make use of this data that is at our fingertips, because it really is. It's just we haven't necessarily got to the point where we're able to really use that data the way we want. So I think that's certainly going to change. It's going to change, how we're hiring, and then again, our requirements in terms of being able to really get in there and look at the data and make sound decisions and critical thinking piece.
You mentioned that the trends that you introduced us to at the beginning are having an impact on how we hire. And so as the head of HR at a large utility company, how does it change the way you hire in terms of, I guess, the initial onboarding, but even training requirements and perhaps even collaborations that maybe didn't even exist in the past?
Yeah, I think it's really pushing us to be far more collaborative with the education institutions, as well as the federal government, and associations. We work closely with Electricity Human Resource Canada, and they have actually just put out a couple of white papers that are really interesting about future of work, the skill sets required. So there's certainly work happening there. I think that our training is evolving. There's going to have to be a lot more role-playing type, learning, just not as prescriptive, perhaps, and focused on that critical thinking, problem solving. We're, as I mentioned before, we're really looking for the data analytics and data scientists. So that changes the game. And also, I would say business development and marketing skills, because our industry is changing, and I think that there shouldn't be a rock left unturned. And in the past, we haven't had to do a lot of that type of work, just the nature of the beast. And I would say statistical and programming skills. We're really wanting to partner also with other organizations to see how they're working through some of these challenges and how they're partnering with the educational institutions. I think there's a real role to play. The Canadian Electricity Association, I sit on a council there, so we're talking about this all of the time, and it's front and center. But I do think we need to start sort of expediting some of the action around it, and I do think there's been some good work done, and also funding availability from the federal government. It needs to, I think, really start to amp up there.
I want to list a few key stakeholders, and I want to ask you for a few remarks on what you think is needed from that stakeholder in terms of ensuring the future electricity workforce is skilled, but also diverse and ultimately productive. So let's start with employers themselves. What would you say is their role going forward?
I think I mentioned the partnerships with the educational institutions it's just key to prepare for the changes that are going to be required from a skill set perspective, and to really help determine future needs and upskill as required, to teach the workforce skills that within internally, and have maybe shift gears a little bit with the onboarding. And even hiring practices, and I touched on it when I talked about the Indigenous population, but I think it's just a shift in culture and how we've done things in the past, and really moving towards a learning culture, I think, will become key, and we're moving that way at SaskPower, but we still have a ways to go for sure.
What about educators themselves? And I say educators because it's universities, it's colleges, it's training institutes. I mean, it's broader than just higher ed.
The role they can play is to really work with organizations and industry, adapt and develop curriculum. I think curriculum needs to change. because the traditional teachings in the post-secondary and other institutions isn't going to fly. And I think, yeah, just those partnerships. We are lucky in particularly in Saskatchewan, we've got great relationships with our two universities and our trade schools. Just really, we need them to listen and to adapt.
And how about governments? I guess governments plural. You spoke a little bit about the federal government. Perhaps you could speak a little bit about provincial governments as well. What is their role in terms of ensuring we're prepared for this future of work?
I think constant communication, and the government of Saskatchewan is our shareholder, so they are obviously very invested in this. But just continuing to help us move the dial and to understand where the industry is going, which I would say they're very astute in doing. And the federal government, I think the funding piece, and I think the federal government could play more of a role in somehow helping with the bigger strategy piece in terms of what's happening with the industry and how are we working together as a nation. Sometimes it feels very siloed, and we've got the 10 jurisdictions or power pools. And it's interesting, this is a bit getting away from the question, but many provinces have the tie lines to the US, but very reluctant to go east to west within our own province because there isn't the incentives to do that. So I would really look to the federal government to sort of change that whole strategy, I guess. And I think that would help. And it would help to allocate funding so that it isn't so, like you mentioned earlier, I hear there's lots of funding going everywhere, but what's the overall strategy for the country and for that federal funding? I think the government could play a better role there.
What would you say to employees in the electricity sector that they need to do now in order to, have a job, have a good job, thrive, and ultimately, be fulfilled in the future?
The challenge is some organizations don't know yet what they will look like. So I think the ambiguity of that is very challenging for people, right? So I would say if you have the right work ethic, if you have the right attitude, and if you're constantly trying to improve your skill sets, communicate with your managers and seek out the more information. Knowledge is power, but also take responsibility for your career. And people around you can help you and support you, but the only person that owns your career is you. And I think sometimes we can fall to the sort of the victim mentality, and I've been there myself. It's just, how do we get out of that and be part of the solution? Because I believe our employees will be a big part of our solution once we can get past some of this. What will the future look like, and some of these big key decisions that haven't yet been made. I think employees will be a key part in unlocking and executing the plan. But I would say too, to hang in there, because this isn't the first time an industry has, been sort of going through such significant transformation. And just because your job might no longer exist doesn't mean you won't exist, right? And to have an open mind, I would say is a big maybe piece of advice I would give is have an open mind, because the future is going to look different, but it doesn't mean you won't be in it.
Now, final question. You have 30 seconds to pitch someone in a position of power in Canada to strengthen and improve Canada's electricity workforce. Who do you choose to pitch, and what do you say in 30 seconds or less?
Sure, the Prime Minister. We need a better, more robust collective strategy in terms of that national grid, and what could Canada look like, and how could Canada be more connected and, be more equal across the board in terms of utility rates and where the future is going, and how can opportunities for a cleaner and renewable energy be available for everyone to participate. I think also just funding to help upskill, keep working with industry and with organizations to get the future employees there, and so that we can all be successful in our organizations.